My name is Billy, and this is my video out. So I grew up in Georgia, in the suburbs of Atlanta. It was a bubble. We hardly had any people of color in my K through 12 experience. It was in I was in high school in the early 90s. No one was out in my high school at all. It wasn't something that I even really thought of. I didn't think of a lot of things because I had a very limited view until I went to college. I first went to University of Georgia, and said I grew up in a bubble. When I went to a really large school, had a lot of fun, and also flunked out straight away. If you had told me at the time that I would end up getting a PhD and being a professor, I would have laughed at you. But I did a lot of experimentation and really got to learn about myself. So even though I flunked out, I learned a lot. So I moved back to Atlanta from Athens, and started working in restaurants, and started doing a lot of LGBTQ activism, advocacy, especially for youth, LGBT youth. I came out as several different things during the time. I actually married a gay man, which is, so people think, like, why would you do that? You know, when you're in your early 20s, everything makes sense, even when it doesn't. And after that it was only a 3-month marriage, I came out as a lesbian for the first time, and that was kind of variously activated at different times. I've always been pretty fluid. And after a couple years working in restaurants, I decided I should go back to college, and so I picked a small school. Well, I say I picked. This is the only school that would actually let me in with my low GPA, and decided to major in communication because it was the least amount of classes I could take and still graduate, but then ended up falling in love with it and ended up getting a PhD in communication after that, and studying gender and sexuality. I was brought up with very strict policing of who I was, always taught to be really concerned with what other people thought and other people's opinions of me, and taught really strict rules for how to behave and how to be a lady. My mom always said, anybody can be a woman, but you have to earn the right to be called a lady, something that was in the South highly regarded, and really strict rules for behavior and the things that you should want, the desires you should have, the whole fantasy of that my mom had for what my life would be, which very, very little of came true for her, unfortunately for her. So I didn't really think about myself, to be honest, that much. I followed the rules, and did what I was supposed to do all the time. So like I said, I've been a lot of different things. I always say it's funny that I'm the LGBTQ director because I've been all of those things at different points in my life. And I always have, and I think part of it is because I kind of was coming out during a time when I was also studying gender and sexuality, gave me a different perspective, I think. And so I've always thought of these labels as not containing me necessarily. So this idea that I was something, I just did things, and I did things that would be labeled as gay or lesbian, or I really have an affinity for queer because I think it's open, and radical politically, but I just kind of fell into things, really. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about, well, I take that back. When I first came out as a lesbian when I was in college, everything was gay, gay, gay. I wanted to watch every lesbian movie. I wanted to have rainbow flags on everything. I was like very into pride, and not very reflective about the ways that I was privileged that allowed me to think that pride was the answer to shame necessarily. And so yeah, I went through this like gay period that I see a lot of my students going through too, and it always makes me smile. But yeah, I don't. At some point, I realized that I felt something queer about me, but it wasn't that I was a lesbian. I wasn't really attracted to women. I was mainly attracted to men, but something about that just felt queer to me. It didn't feel straight. I didn't feel like a straight person. And I guess after a lot of self-reflection, I realized it's because I want to be a gay boy. And it's funny because people want to separate the T from the LGB. It seems like it's kind of ill-fitting, some people think, and talk about how sexual identity and gender identity are such separate things. But for me, they're not. They're very, very tightly bound. I can't really think my gender without my sexuality because they're so intimately connected. So currently, as of today, so I said fluid, right? And that's kind of in every aspect of my life. I'm the director of LGBTQ affairs at University of Florida. So I get to kind of use that passion that I have always had for advocacy, especially for LGBTQ young people. It's a rewarding job and also very challenging job to always have to be the queer and trans person in the room in every space that I go into on a campus that's not necessarily friendly to LGBTQ people and has a pretty fraught history as well. And it's kind of hard emotionally all the time seeing students suffer and not really being able to have that space for my own suffering in a way. So it's and being in a small town in the South and North Central Florida is not easy as well. I'm actually going back to faculty. I've just had some interviews and this will be my last year here. So it's been a really good learning experience, like everything is for me, but I miss teaching and I miss the classroom. I see a lot of struggles around people that will come to me and say things like, I'm trying to figure out if I'm bisexual, or I want, like, trying to catch up to these labels, and I think the labels should come after. I think that we shouldn't necessarily, we can't live without them. They're the way that we communicate to other people what we want and what we desire, and like we have to have them, but I think we put too much importance on them, and that you don't have to feel this pressure to put the exact right label on you, and for people to understand that these labels mean different things to different people. So even if you use the same label, it doesn't mean you necessarily see it in the same way or have anything in common. They're useful, but they're not as important as we tend to think they are. They're also really important because they allow us to come together for activism and to fight back. And give us an identity to coalesce around, but I think we should use them strategically instead of thinking that it's something about necessarily who you are. They're just words. I would always start with right now. In this moment, I identify as a queer trans masculine person. Definitely identify more as boy than man. I actually write a lot about being trans and temporality and this idea of growing up and what that means. And I even named myself Billy because I didn't want to man myself in language. I think Billy is more of a boy name. So I'd be somewhere around that area right now. So I think that the most pressing issue for LGBTQ people today, in my opinion, is racism. And I think that one thing that trans activists are getting right now is the recognition that things like incarceration and immigration and poverty are trans issues and are queer issues. And I think that we absolutely must center the most marginalized folks among us, and I think that it's those folks that also have the most wisdom about the structures that we're trying to dismantle, and we need to listen more, and yeah. God, that's a hard question. I think it's the adventure and play that I'm experiencing as I'm just in the beginnings of transition. Right now, medical transition anyway. And again, partly to my own privilege that I'm able to focus on joy and play and adventure more than the danger and all the other things that exist in different ways for different people. I think that we talk a lot about the negative aspects of being trans in a society that has no place for us, and the struggle, and I don't think we talk enough about the joy, too much about dysphoria, not enough about euphoria, but I think that just the adventure and the fun of this whole thing is my favorite thing about being me, enjoying it. I think that if someone were watching this, I would want them to know that the interesting thing about publishing and about being video recorded is that it captures a moment in time, and that I have no idea who I'm going to be tomorrow or next year, or how I will identify, or what my desires will be, or even where I'm living or what I'll be doing, and so this is just a moment in time, and that I look forward to knowing who I will be then. but the person that they see talking will most assuredly not be the person that I am when they're seeing it.